We're going to turn now to some of the details in Book 1. I want to focus on a couple of scenes there to get us used to reading Virgil's poetry. We're going to see obvious examples of parallels between the stories that Virgil tells and the story that we see in Homer's Odyssey. Just to point out a couple of these, there are wanderings, of course. Aeneas is moving around the Mediterranean in a way that parallels Odysseus's Nostos, his journey home. Aeneas is on his way to found a home, though. He's trying to find a place where a home doesn't exist and create one, whereas Odysseus is trying to get back to a home that already pre-exists. Odysseus is trying to fight to regain his kingdom. Aeneas will have to fight mightily in order to gain a kingdom, one that he didn't own before. Odysseus is harried by Poseidon. Aeneas is going to be harried also, but in his case by Juno. Odysseus is going to be protected and looked out after by Athena. In Aeneas' case, he'll be looked after and protected by his mother, Venus. There'll be lots of others for you to find. Keep in mind, though, with every parallel that you find, there's going to be some Virgilian twist. The parallels are not ever 100%. One of the great scholars of this whole material, a man named Nico Knauer, who was here at the University of Pennsylvania for many years, wrote literally the book on looking at these parallels and talks about how even down to little pieces of sentences and vocabulary choices, Virgil is making reference to Homeric backgrounds, and each time he does, he's tweaking it just a little bit. There's never any lockstep repetition that happens. Borrowings, but always changes, and those changes are always interesting to have a look at. I thought an example of this would be worth our spending a little time looking at. Let's go to a famous scene in Book 1 where Odysseus has washed up on shore of Carthage and is trying to figure out what's happening in what he's seeing in front of him. And over the top of a hill, a beautiful sight comes into his eyes for him and a companion that are looking down at what's happening in Carthage. Meanwhile, the two men pressed on where the pathway led, soon climbing a long ridge that gave a view down over the city and facing towers. Aeneas found where lately huts had been marvelous buildings, gateways, cobbled ways, and din of wagons. There the Tyrians were hard at work laying courses for walls, rolling up stones to build the citadel, while others picked out building sites and plowed a boundary furrow. Laws were being enacted, magistrates and a sacred senate chosen. Here men were dredging harbors, there they laid the deep foundation of a theater and quarried massive pillars to enhance the future stage, as bees in early summer in sunlight in the flowering fields hum at their work, and bring along the young full-grown to beehood, as they cram combs with honey, brimming all the cells with nectar, or take newcomers' plunder, or like troops alerted, drive away the lazy drones, and labor thrives, and sweet time scents the honey. Aeneas said, how fortunate these are whose city walls are rising here and now. So what we've got in this scene is something that we've seen in Homer multiple times, this idea of the approach to an unknown village, landing on an unknown shore and making an approach to a village. Aeneas had just done that. So on the one hand, we can say, sure. There also seems to be a parallel here with Odysseus landing on Scheria, right? There's a grand citadel that he's looking at. It's quite marvelous and amazing to him. So there's parallels there that are quite obvious. But look a little bit more closely and we can locate a couple of really important differences. Remember when Odysseus is standing there at the threshold in Scheria, how amazed he is by the wealth. He sees this beautiful profusion of shiny things, gold and silver, and lapis, blue things, the gorgeous stones around him, the materials, the fine craftsmanship and workmanship. He's amazed by the careful craft, the extreme wealth that he sees in front of him. These are the things that he admires. What does Virgil have Aeneas admire? Aeneas admires the orderliness of this whole thing. The building of the walls is to him amazing. They're working like bees together in perfect unison and harmony. They're bringing good things to store. They're organizing things. They have a senate set up and laws set up. Each of these templates, Virgil's looking at different aspects of the ordering of a society, architecturally, in a civic way, according to legal structures, according to political structures. Aeneas is having a huge wash of admiration, not just for wealth, but he's having a wash of admiration for a carefully constructed society that's going to work well. This is a classic way that Virgil, yes, draws on Homeric precedents, but always turns them in some kind of interesting way to add to his own story and the story that he tells. It's helping us to mark the ways in which Aeneas is quite different from Odysseus. There are some ways in which they're the same, but this marks for us early on one theme that we're going to see repeated over and over again, whereas Odysseus is constantly trying to traverse boundaries and jump over walls, Aeneas is trying to find boundaries and secure them and make sure that there is stability and order in the world. We'll see this difference between the two of them worked out over and over again in the stories that we see. Also in Book 1, I wanted to pay some attention to a scene that happens with a poet named Iopas. You'll remember that in the Odyssey we paid careful attention to scenes that featured Homer's treatment of Demodocus. Remember, Demodocus was a bard, and Homer's treatment of Demodocus gave us a window into what Homer thought poetry was all about. Well, in that way, we can also turn to this Song of Iopas that shows up toward the end of Book 1, and look to it as a way into understanding what Virgil understands poetry to be. Virgil is, of course, aware of the Demotican background that he's drawing from, and he's aware of the tradition that existed even in antiquity, not just in our class, that looked to Demodocus as a way into Homer's ideas on poetry. And now Virgil's going to present his own story of a poet as a way self-consciously into his own ideas on what poetry is all about. And look what he presents. And Lord Iopas with flowing hair, whom giant Atlas taught, made the room echo to his golden lyre. He sang the straying moon and toiling sun, the origin of mankind and the beasts, of rain and fire, the rainy Hyades, Arcturus, the great bear and little bear, the reason winter suns are in such haste to dip in ocean, or what holds the nights endless in winter. Tyrians at this redoubled their applause, the Trojans followed. So what's Virgil telling us that poetry is all about? In Virgil's accounting, it seems to be pretty much like the story of the whole universe. We've got a large cosmological understanding of the importance of poetry. Poetry talks about things like the shape of the universe. It talks about the elements of rain and fire. It talks about the constellations of Arcturus and the Great Bear. It talks about why winter suns depart early from the daytime. All of these things are going to be in the background of what poetry is all about. Virgil, I think, here is giving us an invitation to say, when you look to my poetry, you should imagine me as a poet trying to tell you a story of the entire cosmos. Virgil has larger ambitions, if possible, I think it is, larger ambitions for poetry, I think, even than Homer did. For Virgil, it will be possible to use poetry to convey structures of the cosmos. It's something, sure, that Homer touched on, and as we have talked about, generations of interpreters after Homer, especially those in the allegorical school, understand that his poetry does give a window on these large, huge cosmological questions. But Virgil here, I think, is self-consciously telling us, I'm going to purposefully create a poem that can be read by every lens you can imagine. It will be as rich as you possibly can make it out to be. In a way, it reminds me a little bit of what happens in modern poetry, for example, with figures like James Joyce. James Joyce is constantly giving us a nudge to say, go ahead and read into this because you're going to find tremendous amounts of deep meaning here. I think Virgil's doing the same thing with this opening of his Book 1. Read hard, read carefully, and you'll find grand truths in my story. Homer's leading us down that path, or Virgil's leading us down that path. From here, we'll turn to Book 2 and have a look at Virgil's representation, really the most authoritative representation from all of antiquity about the Trojan horse and the events surrounding the end of the Battle of Troy.